Hello everyone, welcome to my new book, Thank You Trees, written, illustrated and narrated by me, Gig Sixsmith. Woodland games. Sami and Blaze loved playing in their woodland home. Autumn was their favourite season, and the brothers enjoyed playing their games, which were all the more funny now that their russet coats blended into the autumn colours. On windy days, they played Catch a Falling Leaf, which was so much harder than you could imagine. The leaves suddenly darted one way, then the other, caught by the sudden gusts of wind. They rarely managed to catch a leaf in mid-air, but instead ended up crashing into each other and collapsing in laughter. The piles of crispy, crackly leaves on the ground were great fun too, especially when they played hide-and-seek or grandfather's footsteps, when they took it in turns to creep up on each other without being heard. You can just imagine the fun they had. A secret code. As well as the games, there was a really important job that they had to do every autumn. They needed to bury their nuts and seeds somewhere safe for winter, so that they would have some secret food supplies for when there were no nuts to eat. Working together to bury their nuts, they needed to be very organised and clever, so that they would be able to find them again in the months ahead. This year it was Blaze's turn to decide on a secret code, and he was rather pleased with himself as he announced the word whoosh. They would use this code word later to find their food again. Nuts were to be hidden by the walnut tree, between the two oak trees, by the silver birch, and by the hazel tree. Sami did the digging, whilst Blaze stood guard, making sure that none of the other squirrels, birds or animals saw their hiding places. They couldn't risk their food supplies being stolen, so they had to be very careful. Winter. As winter arrived and the days became colder and darker, Sami and Blaze played outdoors for only a short while. They needed to save their energy, and so they spent most of the day curled up together to stay warm in their tree-hollow den. They still had fun together and found other games to play like I Spy, and they told each other stories to pass the time. One cold, sunny morning, they decided it was time to venture out to collect some of their hidden nuts because they were both so hungry. Remembering the code word, whoosh, they headed straight to the walnut tree. Although the ground was hard, they took it in turns to dig, and it wasn't too long before they had found their secret hoard of nuts. Back in their den, they nibbled away happily, eating just a few each day to make them last. The discovery. A few weeks later, when the nuts were all gone, they found themselves feeling very hungry again. Heading out this time to the two enormous oak trees, they took steps between the trees to find the midway point and started to dig. They were so hungry that they both dug frantically at the ground, trying to find their meal as soon as they could. Sami stopped as his paw struck something hard. It didn't feel at all like their nuts, but they were curious to know what it was. Scraping the soil away, they uncovered a silver metal box. They struggled to pull it to the surface because it was so cold to touch, but finally they hauled it out and sat looking at the old battered box, wondering what on earth it could be. A message from the past. Once they caught their breath, they pushed and pulled it through the woodland, back to the safety of their den. Using all their might, they managed to lift the rusty lid slowly and peered nervously inside the box. Reaching inside, Sami lifted out a very old newspaper, dated July 2000. Blaze then pulled out a beautiful but very fragile golden rosette. Realising that the metal box was a time capsule from 20 years before, the Squirrel brothers were curious to read what the newspaper said. Congratulations to Rose and Edwin Squirrelsmith for their outstanding achievements in woodland conservation. They have taught us all a great lesson. By eating only what they needed and not being greedy, they left many of their nuts to grow into new trees. Duchess Squirrel Brassington awarded Edwin and Rose with a golden rosette in honour of their contribution to a healthy planet. Pride and hunger. There was a photo of Rose, Edwin and their family beside them with the Duchess, all looking so proud as they stood between the two big oak trees holding the rosette. Spotting something very exciting, Sami pointed to show Blaze what he had seen. Squirrel Smith was Rose and Edwin's surname. It was also Sami and Blaze's surname. How very funny! Blaze smiled as he realised with great delight that they must be related to Edwin and Rose. Looking at the photo more closely, they both gasped suddenly as they saw how many trees there were in the photo compared to today. Where had all the trees gone in the 20 years since the photo was taken? They felt so confused, feeling such pride for their ancestors, but sadness and guilt too, because of the loss of so many trees. They certainly didn't want to dig up their nuts now. They wanted to leave them to grow. Robin Redbreast. Snuggling up together in their den, they tried to ignore their rumbling tummies as they stared admiringly at the photo. It had been quite an adventure, and Blaze and Sami felt very emotional, hungry, and exhausted. They curled up together and slept for several days. They woke to the sound of Robin Redbreast, who was singing loudly just outside their den. They were feeling so hungry. Robin Redbreast had been spying on them for weeks, and he'd seen everything. He knew all about the time capsule, and he'd listened to the story of their ancestors, Edwin and Rose. He also knew how hungry they were. Sharing. Heading outside, Sami and Blaze were surprised to see that it was snowing. The frosty woodland around them started to fill up with birds and woodland animals. Robin Redbreast had told everyone about the time capsule, and they all wanted to help to grow back the trees. One by one, the animals placed their nuts and seeds on the ground, and before long it was an enormous pile. Robin explained that they would share the supplies between them all, and as long as nobody was greedy, there would be enough for everyone for the rest of the winter. They all agreed to not dig up any more nuts, but to leave them to grow into new trees to replenish their woodland. They spread the word to other woodland communities and felt hopeful for the future. Sami and Blaze relished their meal more than ever before. It wasn't simply the joy of eating after so long, but they enjoyed the company of these wonderful woodland friends and were touched by their kindness. Springtime. Springtime arrived at last, and the woodland was full of colour and life, as new shoots appeared like magic. The days were warm and sunny, and Sami and Blaze showed the other animals all their favourite games. The animals had such fun playing together outdoors from dawn to dusk. Over time, the saplings grew into magnificent trees. The animals were so proud of their home, knowing that it was not just a beautiful woodland, but knowing that they had also created a healthier planet for future generations. As the woodland animals snuggled into their beds at the end of the day, they could see two bright stars twinkling in the sky above them, just as if they were watching over them all. Did you know trees can help us to fight climate change? Trees are clever. They breathe in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen. We have too much carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, and it's making our planet Earth too hot. That's called global warming. Trees reduce pollution, help to prevent flooding, and create homes for wildlife. We need to protect our trees and grow many more. So next time you take a deep breath of air, say, "Thank you, trees."